So if everybody wants to just really quickly drop your name, organization, and location information in the chat, that's great. So we all know where everybody is from. I've already hit record on this so that we can kind of dive right in since we are a couple of minutes behind and we've got a lot of info to cover. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat as we go along, and I will answer them at the end of the session. Hey, Janae, I see you. So hopefully some of my Georgia folks are going to pop on here. So good to always see you guys. So if you weren't on the networking call that we did at the end of July, you may not know exactly what the top 100 rural counties project is. And they are specifically for power building going into 2024 and beyond. And what we wanted to do was take a look at rural counties throughout the country where we could make gains, good, solid gains that would be impactful for the upcoming elections when it comes to progressive movement and progressive policies. And so there was a process that underwent, and I dug through a bunch of data to get this information together. And so we're going to do a deep dive into Georgia and what that looks like. I will tell you full disclosure, I was on the Stacey Abrams campaign in 2022. So I even went back and took a look at a little 2018 data because I really wanted to kind of see what the changes were. So it's good to see everybody with you. And I'm going to go ahead and dive right into this process. I'm going to go through a couple of different things. I'm going to go through the actual presentation with you. Then second, I'm going to show you my working document, and then I'll work you through the process. The hope is to equip folks with, I mean, it does take time, but if you have, you know, interns or volunteers and people, you can stay on top of this data and make some positive changes. So let me share. I need to be able to share my screen, and then I'll be able to give you the presentation. Hold on one second. Hold on. Hopefully it's going to let me do this. Matt, I need to be able to share. Ha ha ha. Okay. Here we go. All right. All right, so everybody can see my screen, right? If you're good, just throw a little hands up, a thumbs up, emoticon up in there, and let me know that everybody can see what we're working with. And I've got a few more folks that are joining, so I'm going to admit them as we go. Okay, so I think we're good. Thank you. Okay, so there are a couple of things that I want you to remember is that the focus is on power building. So that doesn't mean that every county where you can make progress made the top 100 list. Doesn't mean that those counties aren't important, that they're not valuable, and that we don't want to organize in them and keep things moving in those districts. That this is a short-term piece of a much longer strategy. One of the things that the Republican Party has been very good at is long-term strategy, right? And we need to get just as good, if not better at it, if we're going to continue to make progress and frankly, save our communities, right? So we're going to focus on Georgia in this particular deep dive. There were 17 states that made this list because we looked at states that were swing states, states where they were key races that we needed to consider and what was going to make the most significant impact going into 2024. So for Georgia, the data that I gathered was from the 2020 presidential race, House and Senate, 2022 gubernatorial, House and Senate races. And then we had to take into account the voter registrations, right? How many people were registered versus how many people actually turned out and voted. What were the populations of those communities, of those counties, and what percent rural were they? So if there were big metropolitan areas, obviously, you know, Fulton County is not going to be on this list, right? Because it's not rural. Neither is Decatur. Even though some of these counties may have pieces of them that are rural, the focus was on predominantly rural or a significant rural population that would actually make an impact, okay? So the way that I started this was to take a look at the overall presidential map or Senate map or whatever, and to identify the counties that had a margin of 10% or less in these states, right? So, and it was difficult sometimes because there were some that were like right at like 10.5 or 11, and had to really kind of be succinct with this because we really want to make powerful strides. And then once we identified those states, then we went into the counties, and then we cross-referenced those. So what does that look like? For me, that looked like going on to CNN or Politico and actually pulling up those election results and identifying the counties that had 10% or less for each of these races and lining them out, and then seeing if those same counties kept coming up in each of those races. And to see maybe it was Democratic who won in the Senate, and then it was Republican in the House. And why did those things take place? And then identifying those counties that consistently had a margin that that was 10% or less in the majority of those races, and then identifying whether it was a House or Senate or presidential or gubernatorial race that made these counties significant. So this is the end result of your 2020 presidential numbers for Georgia. Now, this is real pretty and real clean. You're going to get access to this document so that you have it and this recording, right? So this is where you can see kind of the overall, but I want to pause here for just a second, and I want to show you what it looked like on the spreadsheet as I put the information together, okay? So this is what it actually looked like at the time that I put it together. So you can see Baldwin, Burke, Dooley, Early, Jefferson, Peach, Twiggs, Washington, and Wilkinson, right? And what I did was I highlighted any of the ones that had, margins and where we wanted to really kind of focus on them, and then track them. So what are those percentages? What are the actual numbers of votes? And then did it all the way across for the gubernatorial race, the Senate race, and then below you'll see each individual House race. And here's what you're going to see. So we used the census data to determine the percent rule. And you can actually type in, like if you type in Georgia counties ranked by population, there's a couple of different sites out there that will actually rank them for you. And so we got current population statuses. Usually that's through 2022 or 2021. And then what the state population rank is. We wanted to see where we could make, really impactful change. And so once I put this information together, it doesn't mean that they made the final list. So as you can see here, you're talking 9 counties in Georgia. Well, if you look at the final Georgia numbers, right, we only pulled 7 of those for the top 100 list. Doesn't mean the other 2 aren't important. They just weren't where we could make the most gains. And in Georgia, the focus is on 2 things: the presidential race and the Senate race. Those are the 2 areas. The counties that came up on this list were not that impactful when it comes to impacting their House races, okay? So I then went back and pulled their population and their voter registration numbers at 2021. And then we took a look at these races to see what percentage of the population was actually voting. So like I'm in Tennessee, about 38% of the people that live here actually vote. That's a problem. So what does this help us determine? It helps us determine, do we have a people that need to be registered? Do we have people that are registered who simply aren't turning out to vote? Where is the problem with our voters and that sort of thing? So that's kind of why this data became really important. And we know that in the off elections, you're going to have lower turnout. But if you look at like Baldwin County, 59% of the population is registered to vote. Whereas if you look at Twiggs, it's 75% of the population that's registered to vote. The other thing that came into play with these numbers is the population. If the population was less than 5,000, we did not include them on the top 100 list because, again, you're looking at resources and then being able to put those resources into action in an impactful way. So is it going to make more sense to send people to Baldwin, right, or Dooley? And so those are the types of things that we've had to look at in processing this data. So I wanted to take a look and see how many of the counties were at, less than 10% or less than 5% in terms of their outcomes. Take a look. Yeah, 100%. So Matt, I'm going to talk about that piece because one of the things, so Matt's comment says this chart shows that in each of these heavily Black rural counties, Warnock's 2022 win percent dropped in each one except Stewart County from what he did in 2020 and 2021 runoff. And it's very troubling because he delivered real results for rural Georgia in 2021 and 2022 on agriculture, rural development, postal service, veterans, and other issues. You're right. And let me just tell you, that is something that is also true of Stacey's numbers in 2022 versus 2018. And so I had to pay attention to those numbers and the differences in those numbers because what did we have that significantly changed between 2018 and 2022 and even from 2020 to 2022? We had a significant elevation in racial rhetoric coming from the Republican side of the House. We just did, right? Dog whistle politics was definitely back. And if I hear the word woke one more time, I might, bum it in my mouth a little bit. But we can't ignore that. And so one of the things that we have to start to take into account is how do we overcome that? How do we get past those very deeply rooted, often unconscious bias that exists in the South and in the rural South? And so that is something that if you are in those counties where they are heavily Black rural counties, that's going to have to play a part in how you go into 2023 and 2024. You finish 2023 and go into 2024. You've got to be able to cut through that. So there's a thought process on how to do that. And so we'll talk more about that in just a second, Matt. But I'm hearing you 100% because I noticed the same thing. So going into the voter registration numbers, the other thing that I did, and I'm going to kind of scroll down to the bottom of this, is I took a look at the numbers from 2020 to 2022. Did we have a gain or a loss of voters and that sort of stuff? And so that's also in this presentation. But this is the working document, right? This is where, and at first it started handwritten, right? So tons of paper. Before it got to the spreadsheet. So the way that it would look for you, if you were doing what I did, is you'd come here to, the Georgia election, right? Where you can very easily, by the the shadings of the red and blue, identify 10%, 5% margins, right? And then I went into the full presidential results and I laid my eyes on every single individual county, and it's painstaking, but it was worth it, right? And I'll give you an example because there were other counties that were on the cusp. So like here, Baldwin stuck out immediately, right? So Baldwin made my list. And then I had to go back after I went through all the counties here, I had to go back and do the same thing for the Senate, the same thing for the House, and then begin to see, did the same county show up over and over again? And then as they did, it was what was the trend in those margins? Because believe it or not, you would see them where they would turn Democratic in one election, maybe the Senate or the House, and then the opposite be true in the other. And oftentimes, one of the things that made a difference were they the incumbent? And then once that was done, then it was time to get down to the nitty gritty. And I'm going to show you kind of what I mean. So if I'm back here at this spreadsheet, once I figured out, okay, these are the counties that I really want to focus on, then it was, okay, so what does it look like? Because CNN's only going to give me the main two parties, but then I need to get into like, what were the other votes that were cast? And so that meant actually going to the Secretary of State's website and comparing that data to what I pulled from CNN or Politico. Usually it was CNN because they were a little easier to do. And so that meant pulling county by county these numbers as well, so that I could see what the votes were in the other column. Now, you'll see this GOTV need over here. I just played a scenario. And what this calculation is if we were able to win the other votes. Why am I focused on the other votes? What does that, if these people, number one, it tells me they are, not only are they already registered to vote, but two, they are casting ballots. They care enough to show up and cast ballots. So what that means is that's two hurdles we don't have to overcome, right? The only thing we need to do is give them a reason to vote for our candidate, right? So I started there. So if we won those other votes, what would we need to flip that county? Does that make sense? So if you look at Burke, for example, it's what, a difference of 192 counties. Well, there were 75 other votes. So if we won those 75, those people who are already in the system and they are participating in the process, if we won those 75, how many more would we need? 117 votes. Guys, we could flip Burke, right? That's when you get to see, hey, holy crap, it might look like 52 and 46 or 47, and that sounds like 6% margin, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, these numbers are actually workable numbers. And so I also paid attention from the Democratic side that had previously already won. So take, for example, Baldwin. Baldwin had won already by what, 200 votes ish, right? And the other votes was 208. If the Republicans won their vote, they'd be up 445. You see what I'm saying? So it's not just important for us to flip the counties and make progress in the counties that we can. It becomes really important for us to hold on to the leads that we have, especially going into 2024, because the rhetoric from 2020 to 2022 is drastically different. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to go back to the presentation for just a second, and then you guys can give me any questions that you have as we go. As we go along, making sure that I haven't missed anybody's chat questions. All right, so. All right, so here we are at the presidential data, right? And I see a chat popping up. Yeah, so what I'm not going to talk about in this particular deep dive is going to be why is my sharing? Okay. What I'm not going to talk about in the deep dive is why is my screen sharing paused and I'm hitting resume and it's not. I'm not going to talk about individual strategies of campaigns just because we don't have the time to do so, right? Yeah, but those are things that these are things that, yes, we do want those things to come up, and we want it to be part of the conversations that you all are having within your state, within your local parties, your state parties, and things like that, because this is where we need to all get on the same sheet of music. A lot of times we know that rural counties get left out of state conversations. But if you can take this data to your state party and say, hey, look at the impact that rural Georgia can make in the next Senate election, in the next presidential election, then you increase your odds of getting additional funding and support and connections with all the players that you need to have in order to make this thing, move in the right direction. So again, I did this for all of the races that we had between 2020 and 2022 that were major races. So gubernatorial as well, and then moving into the Senate and into the House data. Now, one of the things that I want you to see is how it looks a little different from 2020 to 2022. You'll see, and the other thing for the houses that I want you to notice is that the districts that come into play. Every single time in Georgia, it was one of three districts. It was District 8, District 2, or District 12. So paying attention to that, we can start to kind of look at, okay, so what House seats can be most heavily impacted? What does that help us do? It helps us take a look at potential candidates. Where are districts that we need to find the right people to run? What is the voting record of the person that currently holds those seats? Is this person the incumbent and that's what's giving them an advantage in these areas? What are the things that we can do to kind of significantly impact these three things? Georgia, those House seats are going to be a bit of a climb, okay? But what's not a bit of a climb is extending that Senate lead and extending that presidential lead. Those two things have to be the focus going into 2024. Now, population data and voting data, I talked about this just briefly, but I want you to look at the percentage rule. You get anywhere from 35 to 100% rule for every single one of these counties and the total populations that are going to be impacted. That helps you look at the percentage of people, the percentage of rural people, and what's the rank in terms of the state. And then looking at the voting data. Why is this important? You can see trends. So if you look at Baldwin, their numbers of registered voters went down in 2022, right? Burke increased. Dooley went down. Early went down. Jefferson went down, right? Peach went down. Twiggs went down. Do you see a trend in how these things are, what the numbers look like and your voting data? So why are people disengaging from the process? How are people getting off the rolls? Do they know they're off the rolls? Are we taking time to make sure that people actually check their voter registration data? So, and I'm going to share this with you. So this is something I would not have known in 2022 had I not been working the campaign. Liza Conrad ran our voter protection stuff for the campaign. And what I did not know, so I moved back to Georgia in 2021. And what I did not know, let me see, gone. Okay, what I did not know is that, let me see if I got it. What I did not know is that when I moved back, I went to the DMV like a good girl and I updated my driver's license information, right? And I checked that little box that says, do you want to update your voter registration information at the same time? And of course I said, absolutely, I want to do that. What I did not know is that for 11 months in 2021, that system that connected the DMV to voter registration was down for 11 months. Well, how does that impact you in Georgia? Well, it impacts you because during early voting, right, the 3 weeks of early voting, you can vote anywhere in your county. Great, awesome, amazing. But on election day, you can only vote at your precinct. So had I not known that and waited till election day to go vote, I would have gone to my new precinct, right, and not known that I couldn't vote. That it was my old precinct that was still on my voter registration information. So one of the things that I talked to people heavily about in this process was that's one of the advantages of early voting, right? Is you can vote anywhere in your county at that time. And these are going to be different for each state, but I happen to know Georgia because I was just there. So these are things that are important when you start talking about why people need to get out and vote, why they need to vote early, why they need to check their voter registration, because as we could clearly see based on the data, people are, for some reason and in some way, shape, or form, they're coming off the rolls, right? And in numbers that absolutely matter. There's only one county where the voter registration actually increased, and that was Burke. Everybody else was a loss. Everybody else was a loss. So we want to be able to take a look at those numbers and identify places where do we put our efforts? Do we put our efforts into turning out the vote? Do we put our efforts into voter registration? Do we put our efforts into checking your voter registration status? Those things are going to be impactful, especially in rural communities where every single vote matters. There were some counties, there was actually one county in a different state that the difference in the vote was one vote. That was the difference in the win, was one singular vote. Okay. So when you start to take a look at the numbers, so if we come down here and we look at the Senate 2022 race, there were, for Baldwin, it's Democratic. We know that. Jefferson was Democratic. Washington was not. But look at the difference. 45 votes. If you won these 66 in Washington County and you had another additional 45 votes in Washington County, that county would have flipped, right? So I'm going to highlight these in green for you so that you can see. Again, if you get these 54, you're over the top, because the difference in the votes here was what, 117, right? 117. So that's another one that can flip. And then we already looked here. This is important for us to know because they barely snuck this out in front of us. 90 some votes was the difference. So we would have been in the positive 125 if we simply got those other people to vote for us versus who they voted for. So flipping those others. And then what I looked at was any place where the votes were 300 or less, or in the 300s to 200s, then those were what we considered close races. And if you look, every single one of these, with the exception of early, would be what we considered early. And the other thing to keep in mind is the numbers. So if you have a population of 6,700 people and you need 530 votes, that's a whole lot different than when you have a population of 17,000 people and you need 370 votes, right? They're the same numbers, but smaller communities, which may or may not be more difficult than the other, if that makes sense, because you're playing with a smaller pool. I have the feeling, so I'm born and raised in a small town, don't judge me. But so what does that mean? One of the things that I think is an advantage in smaller communities and rural communities is news spreads fast. I don't care what kind of news it is, it spreads fast. I know who went to jail, who had a baby, who's pregnant, and who got married because it just spreads. So what does that mean? It means that if you can make powerful arguments, if you can make arguments that make sense to the voters that you're talking about, then that information is going to spread at a faster rate, and make a difference long term in the outcome of the elections that you're having. So I'm going to pause here for just a second, and I'm going to open it up. Raise your hand if you have any questions or comments about the data or about the process that I've gone through to kind of digest the data and pull it into some things. And then I have some other information to share with you. Anybody, don't be shy. Matt's the only one I can see. Everybody else is off camera.
Yeah, maybe I'll just ask Dani. So one of the struggles that we're, thinking about is how many people does it take in a community from a like a field or volunteer perspective to to be able to like leverage that energy and momentum into like on the ground work, right? Because I think with these counties, this is a really great way to think like, okay, if you're wanting to target people with mail, or you're wanting to target people with radio stations, or things like that, like that this is a great great place to start. Social media and stuff, I think people are going to just target people wherever they're at, based on demographics. But the thing that I always try and figure out is like, okay, if you're starting from absolute scratch in a community, it's really hard to get anything moving. But if you can kind of find these pockets, I think that's helpful. And I think that looking at the way that you did the data, it's really good, not just to like look at a spreadsheet and analyze it, but to also kind of try and identify where that momentum is. So I'm wondering if you or if others, on the call have had experience with like, okay, like what is enough support on the ground to then move it forward. I see Matt has his hand up.
Yeah, he does. And then so Matt, I'll let you answer, and then I'll add my 2 cents in.
So in dealing with folks in Georgia and rural Georgia, one of the complaints that I've heard so much is that there's not enough money, sort of get out the vote, street money, directed toward getting especially young people in the predominantly Black rural counties. They're looking for some resources for, going into the beauty salons, going to the Saturday football game, which is a huge, community event where like the whole community comes out to the big high school game. And they're looking north to Atlanta, and they're saying, we're not receiving this kind of financial resources to help us increase these margins. that
Mhm.
you just eloquently broke down on the spreadsheet. They also see certain groups like, Black Voters Matter is a great organization. And I don't know where their financial, support comes from, but there's also kind of a disconnect. They see them riding around in a big fancy bus and they're like, wait, we want to board the bus, don't leave us behind.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hear you on all of those fronts. So because when I worked and Janae was on the campaign too, and she was in some significantly rural communities. So a couple of things. This is one of the reasons why the data is so important, because you can leverage the data to get the money. And the bottom line is you don't get what you don't ask for, right? And so, so I had this conversation with a woman by the name of Roberta Thacker. She's in Southwest Virginia, very red at this point, used to be very blue. And one of the things she started doing, she said, I would show up at every state Democratic meeting that was happening in any of the counties where I could get to them. And I would walk in the door, and the first thing I would say is, "Hey, I'm Roberta. I'm with Lee County, Democrats." Da 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 da. And eventually, she built this relationship in a short period of time because everybody knew her. Right? Again, that's one of the advantages in small communities. People will know you very, very quickly. And so I think that is something that somebody has to take the initiative. We can't say, "Oh, I'm not getting it," right? Whether you get it, go get it, go ask for it. So we also did an exit interview project, and I did that, and I talked to about 50 organizers across the country. And one of the things that we talked about were leveraging our philanthropic organizations and institutions to be kind of that middle ground between organizers and legislators, and organizers and parties. So it's developing those relationships and not waiting until the last minute to get them done. I think in rural communities and in the inner city, because I was in both, we have the same challenges. Those people don't trust, period. Inner cities and rural, they don't trust outsiders. They know they're not going to get talked to until it's 3 months before the election, 4 months before the election. And nobody's putting money in those communities. So those are the tasks. And I don't know the exact answer about how to do it in every scenario, but those are a couple of things that have to happen off top. When you talk about what does it mean for boots on the ground, Matt, I think that varies by community and the geographical structure. So like for me, if I'm looking at how to go about Hawkins County, Tennessee, that is going to look very different than if I'm talking about Johnson County, Tennessee, because one is going to be much more spread out, much more farmland, and that sort of thing. So what I would say to people is you have to look at how many doors can you knock in a particular county, given its geographical makeup. What are the events and places where you can hit a large number of people in a short amount of time? Football games, farmers markets, flea markets, those types of things. And then if you go into those areas, you better make sure that you know how to organize in those settings, because nobody's coming to a teenage high school football game wanting to talk to you about politics. So how do you make it relevant if you're there when they're there? And that's also a huge part of being able to organize and mobilize when you do get in front of a huge segment of people. Does that make sense? So
they're asking for the money to be spent on like the Peach County residents to go to those games in Fort Valley, and they don't want outsiders coming in with, purple hair and nose rings and,
yeah,
the cities. Yeah. They want the money to hire their own local people,
as it should be.
Itself is a level of buy-in for them, and then they're talking to their neighbors and their friends on a peer-to-peer, people they know, and when they're talking, maybe the message is going to be received more because there's a level of trust, since they know, oh, he plays football with my son, or that his mother's the cafeteria director at the high school.
I hear you 100%. The thing too is that when you are that local person and you're wanting the money to go to these places, whether we like it or not, if you're asking for money, people want to know what you can do with the money.
Yeah.
what can you do? If I'm giving you a check for 10 grand, what can you do with this money? And that's one of the reasons why we dug in to get this data, because if I say with this money, you know, we're looking at Peach, Peach is doable, right? I'm over here looking at the last Senate race, looking at Peach, and you're literally talking about 350 votes difference, right? That's doable. I don't care. You know, it's 100% doable. So that has to be the conversation when you're saying, okay, I want this money. I mean, I want $1 million. I want to win the lottery, but what can I do with the money? And so maybe that's where you all start to work together. Janae and I had this conversation. I'm gonna let her talk too, but she said one of the things that she did was she would contact bordering counties that had had success with Democratic candidates and say, hey, who are you? Who are your super volunteers? Who are your best donors? Who are your whatever? And collaborate. Instead of what I saw was a lot of separation from candidates, from parties, from movements. And that's a problem that I think we have as a party and as a movement, is all of these different separate entities who don't collaborate and really work together. Janae, go ahead.
I was just trying to put my hand down because you just covered almost everything. Hi, Miss Dani. How you doing?
I'm good.
So pretty much, hi everyone. She just covered pretty much everything I was going to say. The only other thing that I was going to add in there is what do you call it? Going to the officials, going to all the city officials. When you first get into a city, a county you know nothing about, I was taught by a 21-year-old organizer that Sterling is awesome. He was like, what are you doing? He said, you need to talk to everybody in that county first. I wasn't even thinking that. I was thinking, you know, go to the churches and, you know, all that. But when you go to the city officials that are all Democrat, you kind of hit that too. When you go to all of those that are Democrats, then you get their list. You ask them for their list because we got to win. We have to win. So they feel obligated to have to give you their list. Now you got a cold, you got a not so cold call, you got a warm call. You kind of know who you need to kind of get on your team. If you have Covington and you don't have Attorney Stacy on your team, then you're losing. You know what I'm saying? So you just got to know who and listen, because they're going to tell you who the mover and the shakers are.
And that goes along with your influencers. That was another thing that came up in the exit interview process, is the importance of being able to identify the people in your region, the people in your county who have influence. And maybe it's not political influence, right? Maybe it is social influence. Who are the people that are speaking out about certain issues? That was the other thing that we talked about. So being able to take issue campaigns and push them into your political campaigns. So if we specifically talk about Peach, Matt, if you were going to tell me, what do you think are the main issue campaigns that have traction that you could build momentum of in Peach County, what would it be?
Cannabis for young people.
Cannabis.
Yeah.
For young. Okay. Awesome. So how has that been approached up until now in terms of getting the vote out and mobilizing people to vote?
It really hasn't.
Right. So that's an opportunity.
Another factor to Georgia is that in all of Middle and South Georgia, there was not a single statewide candidate on the ballot from that region of the state. They were all from up north. So like I live in the western part of Massachusetts, 12% of the state. We rarely, if ever, have anybody on the statewide ticket from out here. We're, you know, everything is Boston area and the East, and they have a thriving economy and we don't, and we're like the forgotten land. And
so I hear two things automatically that are points that can be started, right? One is candidate recruitment. And I would be looking at my influencers, and I would be looking at my influencers that are tied to cannabis. Right. And then what I would be looking for is counties that are similar in demographics to mine, where cannabis has been legalized and how that money has been used to the benefit of that county. right? So if you look at a state like Colorado, and you can find a county that is similar in demographics to Peach or whatever other county it is, right? And you can call those officials and say, okay, what was this process like for you? And how has that money been used? And what has it now done for you? Then that's data that you can take, coupled with this data that says, look, 350 flipping votes, and look what we'd be able to do for Peach County. Because at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants to know is what can you do for me? Right? The other Matt Hilton, Matt.
I've been the other Matt my whole life. So can I ask a question? So I know nothing about the South, and I know the Midwest pretty well. And in the Midwest, where you have kind of receding Democratic voters, visibility, there's something that's happening around visibility in local communities where, like, for example, maybe Obama did a pretty good job of actually reaching out to, small towns and rural communities. You saw a lot of Obama signs, you saw a lot of presence in these communities. Since then, it's almost been it's almost gone entirely. And Trump has moved in with, it's Trump signs now, they're homemade. There's just this real strong feeling of like Trump country. And I actually think Obama did a pretty good job of like Obama country. Like I think people have missed that. Is that, I don't know, in the South, Georgia specifically, like especially within the Black community, I have no idea if there's similar dynamics or different dynamics where you have kind of a rising electorate where, more and more people are voting for Democrats in Georgia. Like, do you think that visibility still matters? Does it matter less? Is it different? Is it more in, like you're saying, different kind of community spaces, less, yard signs? I'm just wondering if anybody else has thoughts on that. Because, to make it feel bigger than just, there's 1,000 Democrats in a community of 8,000 people. That might feel small, but if we can make it feel bigger, it might kind of take on the idea that people here just don't vote for Democrats.
Yeah. So Janae, I'll let you add that, and then I'll throw my 2 cents on top. You got to come off mute.
I'm just talking. I'm sorry. I was just going to say that what I found in the rural South, first of all, you got to put the right people there. If you put a young African American girl in Putney, Putney County, was it Colquitt County, versus they put me out there that's kind of middle age, I was able to talk and to get along with the people more. I was able to make the people trust me more. So one of the things that I found out is, especially in those little rural towns, it may cost a couple $100s, but if we just have block parties, a small block party in the middle of where everybody is, and we just hot dogs and drinks and maybe some chips, it brings so many people out because they already don't have that there. And then when they see us there and we're actually bringing some swag every now and then when we get to that part, just when we're actually showing up, they appreciate us more, because the one thing that every small rural county I've been in says, we forget about them. Every single one of them say that. So when you're going in and you might have to spend $100-$200 just to get a few cases of hot dogs and stuff, now you got everybody there. You can have somebody setting up that's registering to vote. You can have, and then you're talking to people. The people are able to walk up and talk to you. That just seems to work. I've turned a lot of purple people blue like that. Just really conversation. And I think that the block parties and those, when we were doing the food truck Thursdays, was not only helping the people, it was helping the business people as well, because a lot of people didn't know those. Now you got all of these people that are showing up to different events. When something pops up, they're showing up. Those are the people we need to grab, because those are the people that are trying to figure out, do we really want to deal with this, or is it worth it or not?
Yeah. So, and to piggyback on top of that, to answer your question about yard signs, they are necessary and we need them. That was something that I wished we had much sooner in the campaign last year. I had people calling up asking for yard signs. I mean, in August, and not being able to get them to them. So to your question, visibility is important, especially in small towns. It just is, because if they don't see it, it's not there, right? And there's something associated with being able to see you. The other thing too is that we don't talk enough about our benefits. Like you said, Matt, you were talking about Warnock and people not knowing. We as a party spend too much time talking about the Republican side of the things and what they're doing. People are sick of it. People need to know, what are you going to be able to do for me and how impactful is it going to be, right? And it's about starting right now. And I will say this, it's not just about, sure, age matters and things like that sometimes. And what I will say is that, to me, the number one thing that you have to have when you go into these communities is authenticity. Do I believe you? If you don't have it, if you don't know why you're there, if you don't believe in your heart the things that you are saying to people, I don't care how many hot dogs or pizzas you serve or how dope your DJ is, nobody's listening. And what we have a lot of people right now that aren't bought in. We have that right now. Within our party, we have people that are not bought in to our candidate, right? And we have to figure out how to get the buy-in. That's number one, so that people are authentic. Number two, you have to know all of the there are 4 issues that everything comes back to. It comes back to either housing, healthcare, education, or economic stability. That's it. I don't care what you name, it comes down to one of those 4 issues. So as organizers, as people that are knocking on these doors, you have to be able to talk about those issues and make it specific to the county and the person that you're talking to. How does that relate in your particular county? And that's the way that you have to be able to do that and articulate it. That's how, I mean, I got pulled into a black barbershop. These guys had seen me out there for 2 days and they asked me to come in and they started asking me questions about policy, right? And we started having conversations about abortion. Listen, you have to figure out how to make the abortion conversation relevant to the man. And it ain't tough. Yes, you can try to play on the, oh, imagine if it's your sister or your wife or your mother, but that's an imagination, right? What I did with men in Georgia, standing in a black barbershop, was, hey, did you know that under Georgia law, you know, what could happen right now with a woman not being able to have an abortion is, as soon as they're able to determine, you know, genetics, the DNA of the baby, you can have to start paying child support as early as however many weeks they can safely do that. And every black man in the barbershop said, what? Yeah, you want to start paying child support at 12 weeks? They were like, and literally one of the guys broke out his cell phone and said, say that again, and started recording me. Next thing you know, I got invited to a lounge, right? Now imagine going into a lounge where people have drinks and hookahs on a Thursday night at 10 o'clock. They don't want to talk to me. I'm in a purple Stacey Abrams t-shirt, right? The first thing I said when I hit the stage was, I know y'all did not want to come here and talk about politics. I get it. I got it. I don't want to be here either. I would rather be having a drink like you. But we have to da-da-da-da-da, right? And so as soon as I start that conversation and I say the same thing about paying child support, everybody in the room was like, what? And I was like, yeah, have you voted yet? Right? It's about making the issues and just talking to people like as if they're in your living room, your kitchen, at the bar, or in your church. Talk to people in that manner. So if we take, what do we take away from this data? We take away from the fact that we have 9 counties in Georgia that are in rural communities that absolutely have the potential for either significant movement or to be completely flipped between now and November of 2024. That's a real thing based on the data, right? Not about what we wish, but what the numbers show us, right? Number 2, we know that we need to take whatever the policies are and to be able to relate it to that community. Number 3, you need to find out what are the issues that move the people in those communities and be able to tie the policies and the vote to the issues that matter to the people, right? And then get boots on the ground to be able to convey that information to them. Use all of that data together to get the funds that you need from the people that you need it from. And you do that by finding other counties that have done what your issue is, right? That have similar different demographics, find out how it benefited that county, and then be able to show it to the powers that be in the area where you are doing the work. All of those things are very doable. The only other thing that I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to show you this just briefly because you're going to get it in a follow-up email, but we also started doing something just in the last month where we started looking at what are the counties that are in these states that do not have a representative from the Democratic Party. In Georgia, there are 41 counties. 5 of them are on our list. More than half of the counties in Georgia, the rural counties where we can either flip them or continue to make gains, do not have a Democratic Party leader in those counties. That's significant, right? So how do we change those things? That's, again, it's about recruitment. It's about finding the right people and getting people to be motivated to step up. And I think sometimes people don't step up because they think it's no use, but there is use. And if you can show people, hey, listen, this is what could happen here, and talk in numbers that matter. What if I said, 4 out of every 10 people right now are 4.5 people out of every 10 people that vote in this county are voting Democrat? How many people aren't voting because they think the number is much smaller? So does that make sense to everybody? If you take away those, how to leverage the data, how to tie it to your issue campaigns, how to take those issue campaigns, find corresponding counties that have done what you want to do, that have similar demographics, and find the benefits to them, and then be able to leverage all of that information to recruit the right candidates, the right organizers, and to get the funding that you want for your communities. Does that make sense? Yeah? Awesome. I'm going to follow up just by telling you this little piece before we get out of here, as soon as I find my presentation for you. Okay, so what's going to happen next is you're going to get an email. You're going to have a recording of this deep dive presentation. You're going to get the PDF of the presentation. So you'll get all the pretty clean data. You'll get a link to the Top 100 Rural Counties project if you don't already have it. I'll also include in there the exit interview project if you're interested in that. It's got a lot of really good information for organizers and boots on the ground. An invitation to join our monthly networking call. So, I hear a lot of rural people saying, we're not all getting together. Well, we are every single month on a Zoom with me and other people. And so this is rural organizers throughout the state. So join that monthly networking call. It's the 4th Thursday of every single month at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then you'll also get the counties without Democratic representation. And that's what's coming up next. How does the strategy change for nonpartisan races? I don't think that it does, because it's not about partisan, it's about policy, right? And so I think that that's the thing. A lot of times we get into the language of Republican or Democrat or conservative and liberal. It's not. It's the same strategy for progressive policy that impacts the lives of people. And so sometimes I take out those, what I call trigger words, and just have these conversations about the issue itself, because the issue most of the time is not political. We make it political to win races and raise money, but the issue is human in nature. And so the strategy is exactly the same, right? And there are, what I would say is, instead of looking at funding from a particular party, this is where you're looking at funding from organizations and philanthropic individuals and institutions that have the same policy objective that you do. And there are a lot of them out there, if that makes sense. Any other questions before we wrap up? Matt, I'm glad you joined. Yeah, you got another question?
Not a question, but a comment, which is Sanford Bishop, who's the longtime congressman from the 2nd District, is a very critical asset in the Democratic infrastructure of South Georgia. And there's a sort of undercurrent of folks that feel as though he could be more active. I'll say that. Sometimes people, and he has a safe seat, sometimes people, they just, all I care about is my House seat and these federal issues. And they're surrounded by Austin Scotts and Rick Allens and these other Republican, players. And you have a guy like that who can pick up the phone and his phone calls get answered, in return. Yeah. There's a feeling that he could be doing a little bit more. That's all.
And so here's what I would this is what I would say. I would say, somebody pick up the phone. Somebody do a petition. Somebody get, 50 people to send a letter and say, hey, this is what we need from you. Sometimes I
Some of the
think
people
we,
saying this are his former staffers. I mean, a
right,
friend
but
who
so
lives in
this is,
Sylvester, Georgia. Okay.
so this is what happens though. People think it and people say it to other people, but not
Yeah.
to the person themselves.
Yeah.
And so we have to get bold and we have to get brave about the things that we need to communicate. You know, I'm one of those people that have stuck my neck out and said, hey, listen, it's great that you are ridiculously smart and intelligent and you have great policy, and people need to see that you're a human being and you're vulnerable, right? Because you have to connect with people on a personal level. Obama was great at that. So agreed. So this is what I would say: start to have those conversations, Matt. When people say, "Who are the people that aren't doing what they could be doing? Who has the position to be impactful?" And then organizing people to make those people be. You know what's great? I'd write an op-ed. I would write an op-ed in the daggone paper with his name in it. I promise you, somebody's gonna know. And a lot of local papers, they don't have the resources for tons of stories. They love editorials, they love op-eds because it's content they don't have to generate, right? So what if there were op-eds around cannabis? What if there were op-eds around, you know, Bishop? What if there, you know what I mean? Use all of those resources to the best of your ability. So
in Virginia, rural ground game has gone to Senator Kane, and it's a Northern Virginia Democrat who very urban suburban, but they have campaign committees and leadership PACs, and they've said, give us a challenge grant. In other words, if you give us 5,000, we'll raise 5,000. And so Kane said, yeah, you're on, you know, we got a deal.
Yep.
And they fulfilled it, you know, like they said, we'll do it by the end of December 2022. And he said, okay.
Yeah. And that's again what I said, telling people, what are you going to do with the money if they give it to you? Right. So I appreciate you all very much. I have another one of these in like 60 seconds. So stay tuned for the email that I'm going to send you. Make sure that you register for our monthly networking call, and let's make some moves come 2024. You guys, you're very welcome, Aaron. See you guys later. Bye, Janae.